Hello again, everybody. This is James Bartley, and you're listening to the Cosmic Switchboard Show. My guest today is old friend Evie Lorgen. Evie, how are you? And it's so great to have you back on the show.
Thank you, James. And it's always a pleasure because I know I could speak freely with you. And then there are always things that come up as we go on, and these things keep happening more and more. We're getting better insights onto how things are happening, and including the love bite, including what we talked about right before, where you're mentioning maybe the reptilian agenda, things amping up. And so, yeah, I'm glad we can talk today because a few things have come up recently, and I always wanted to have the opportunity to speak freely so that my views and opinions can always be made known, because my sense is that a lot of times the work that we do could be slanted, and if it came out in a different format. And I'm just saying that now because I know that a lot of things get counterfeited or copied, and then the original meaning or idea is changed, and then it might put a spin on something that wasn't ordinarily meant to be that way. And that's just what happens in the world and in the media. And I know you know this with people that you've known over the years, where they might have had an original story and then something came out on a bigger TV or a movie kind of thing, and then they only take a part of it and they spin it. I just wanted to say that because I think that the originals who've been through this for years and years, like us, let it be known that there's always a record of our original findings and what we've learned along the way. So that's my message right now. And we could just continue with whatever's going on and what you want to bring up for today.
A lot of the themes, subjects, experiences we were describing privately to one another in emails, this is before social media really kicked off. Some of the content was winding up literally on TV shows. So,
Yes.
and we knew for a fact that our emails were being side routed to a national security agency facility, and I'll go ahead and say it. I don't care. It's at
Yeah.
Marina Del Rey, and a lot of people out there in the intelligence community know what I'm talking about. There's a NSA eavesdropping facility, a data collection, data mining place over there. And what happened, dear listeners, was one fine day, and this is in the old dial-up days. Okay,
Oh,
one
wow.
fine day, I downloaded my email. Remember, I told you about this, Evie? Several hundred emails came out, and some of them I'd never seen before. And they were going back in batches for several months. And what had emerged was somehow, somehow, these emails were side routed. At least a copy, if not the original, was sent to Marina Del Rey, and they held it for a certain period of time, probably analyzed it, et cetera, et cetera. And then, just as a psyop, they decided to send it all back in one big dump, knowing it would clog up my dial-up and it would take
Oh,
forever to
no.
load up in Outlook, right? And when it finally did, there's all these unopened emails of our discussions going back several months. And we won't go into details, but there was the time when something related to you on a personal level wound up in an X-Files episode.
Oh, no. Which one
Yeah.
is that?
Do you want me to mention it now? What episode it was?
Yeah, yeah, because I know several episodes on X Files that ended up that were personal people we knew, even the name, even which is an unusual name. But go ahead and tell me first, and then
Well,
I'll.
there was the Rain Man episode. Remember?
Oh, that one. Oh, that one. Yeah. And then they tried to make the Rain Man was a love bite setup of a woman who had this crush on a man who was, I'm not going to say who they were
Modeled him
emulating.
after.
Okay, we knew who it was, but it was one of my love bites, right? But and then trying to make the woman look like a stupid, fat, blonde, floozy,
Yes,
crying
yes.
like mascara drips down her face. And then there's these big hail raindrops in the shape of hearts falling down while she's like probably unrequited love crying over this love bite setup, who's this total egotist who's called the weatherman. Actually, I think it
Yes,
was
yes.
weatherman.
He would go to drought-ridden places and bring rain. And he was a charlatan, right? So point
Yeah.
being, dear listeners, is that a lot of distortions are starting to come out. The whole balloon thing already is so ridiculous. And look how it triggered all the surface level truth. There's blue beam, fake alien invasion coming.
Oh, yes.
That's the psyop itself, because that's putting the cart before the horse. The reptilian overlordship is here, has been here for millions of years. we reside in a reptilian sphere of influence. So to say that, oh, fake alien invasion is coming, wait, the invasion ended a long time ago. This is an occupation. It's
Yes,
we're
you're
under
right about that.
reptilian occupation, and it's coming out now in the form of everything that's being normalized is bestial, it's atrocious, it's heinous, it's evil. And the persecution that's being meted out openly now to Christians is getting really serious now. To say that, oh, they're going to do a fake alien invasion when reptilians already control the planet, that's like putting the cart before the horse. And a quick point I want to make, tying this into current events, if the events of the last couple of weeks have not convinced these surface level truthers that we are under alien attack and under alien oppression, nothing will.
One of our researcher friends from the San Francisco Bay Area, more or less, said, "Oh, did you hear there was a train derailment in North Carolina yesterday morning, my
Yes.
time, and it was Lexington." So I didn't hear about it, and I don't know if there was any kind of toxins in whatever was derailed. And it was probably a smaller situation, but I asked my mom because all our ancestors on my both parents' side are from Western North Carolina. We have relatives in the Appalachian that go back 300 years. So I said, well, Lexington, is there anything about that town? My friend was saying, is it near you? But I'm in Western, which is mountains, right? Western North Carolina. So Lexington is actually what they call the Piedmont. It's in between the coastal and the mountains. So it's like in the middle,
Yeah.
basically. But Lexington, I'm sure you with your military history know that it was a key Revolutionary War type of site that carries history, probably related to either original revolts or successful battles with the Revolutionary War in America. So
Yeah.
what just kind of thought, brought to my mind, well, wait a minute, that's patriot sites. That's a symbolic
Yes, it
gesture.
is. Yes, it is.
Stomp down the original people who are like, I ain't putting up with this monarchy rule, the English, the British, whoever they are. It doesn't matter what war it is. There's a certain type of people that, deep in the South, in the Appalachian Mountains, Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, there's areas where it's like the root culture that goes back actually a lot to Scotland and
Yes.
like the Braveheart kind of people. And then they ain't telling us what to do in the mountains. We don't like it. We sniff it out and we're gonna fight.
That's right.
So it's the fighting spirit. And I think they're trying to squelch that spirit. And it's kind of like a symbolic gesture, but anybody probably have a better opinion than I about the
No,
symbology
that
of
makes perfect sense. I mean,
government.
Lexington is a key place, and they do this symbolically. Like when they announced the fake bin Laden raid, assassination of bin Laden, they happened to do it live during a baseball game, which I was watching in Philadelphia, where the Philadelphia Bell is, the Constitution, the Constitutional Convention, all that stuff that happened in Philadelphia. They
Wow.
announced the phony bin Laden raid, which resulted later on in the murder of all these Navy SEALs. Keep them quiet.
Yeah.
So they pick these times and dates to do a reversal, a mere reversal of
Yes.
what's really happened. Okay, here's your holiday. We're going to turn it on its head and just make a big joke out of it, or toxify the place. If freedom came from there at some point in the past, and then we got to, symbolic, like the Romans pouring salt over Carthage after they destroyed it, right?
Oh, wow. Oh, goodness. Well, you know more about your military history and how things are done, symbolically to squelch, the people who have this instinctive revolt against a type of slavery and a type of manipulation that really does go. I mean, you can call it the reptilian influence, but I think it goes deeper to possibly different forms of aliens or malevolent beings on these other levels. And this is something that my friend that I just talked to, who told me about this thing this morning on an email, he always brings up the work and the researcher of a Scottish psychic and researcher named Chris Thomas. And he's now deceased, Chris Thomas is, but Chris Thomas had a view based on his ability to go into the Akashic and do much more in-depth, accurate readings of, Earth history, people, and healing. But he talked about a particular type of alien or ET being that its form was, he called them Velons, like
I've
Velon.
heard the term before. Yeah.
Yeah, but the Velons were really, I guess, another term for Anunnaki, but they were able and have been able to change their forms or lower type of beings in many different forms, but the same agenda. And so they're involved in a lot of the channeling, high level channeling of the false light, or different kinds of beings that they want to present in a good way or maybe even a
Yes,
bad way.
yes.
But so they're like these ones at the top that I'm thinking are a type of hierarchical egregore entity that will work itself in and through many different groups or agendas or forms. So, and this is something that's not really brought up in the UFO community simply because it's so influenced by a lot of the channeling, I would have to say, a lot of the channeling, or even people getting messages from, supposedly these higher beings. And then sometimes we find out only years later. And this is what the same friend who I talking about, who told me about the derailment, he found out, and his story is actually in my second book on the Dark Cupid, but he was dating a woman who was a very high level channeler of beings, including Saint Germain, but some of the ascended masters, Blavatskyan hierarchical beings.
Yeah.
But it was like a nasty love bite. She was like a high level Jezebel, dark spirit stuff. And so, but so many people are influenced and believe these high level channeled beings who appear to be good. And then you find out later that they're like part of this false light kind of business. And you would never know unless you find out years later that they were involved in this like high level alien love bite from hell, who was just masquerading and tricking using many different forms or forms of aliens that they're saying are good or whatever. I just had to mention that because so much of what I'm coming across and continue to come across is more of the, false twin flamish kinds of reports.
Yes.
But they may not be, let's say, a classic alien abductee or a MyLab or even an MK Ultra or any of these subpopulations that they have a higher targeting kind of thing. But the ones that are the powerful love bites where they usually like haven't had something as powerful, except when the love bite partner was somebody who was channeling one of these ascended masters or under that egregore in a spiritual group. So the beings who are, controlling.
Evie, pardon me for a second. What's an egregore, or how do you pronounce that?
Well, egregore is a kind of a term that it might be based on blood, but it's more like a spiritual entity that's more than one entity, but like of a group that puts its spiritual, psychic, and maybe even blood sacrifice energy into being. So it would be like a corporation could have its own egregore.
Oh, yes, yes.
So it would be if there's certain spiritual groups or cults, for example, and they may or may not do blood sacrifice things, but they still may have an egregore or an entity that's like a hive mind entity that has its agenda and will work its cloud of influence in and through the people in the cult. So
yes,
this is like, there's like another power behind, and this is why some of these false twin flame things are much more dramatic and supernatural and affect people on deeper levels than the normal, love bitey kind of obsession thing. And it's just a narcissist and a codependent. You've got a lot more behind it that manifests in some of these paranormal ways. And it's the egregore that I think is behind it, and certain beings claiming to be ascended masters or certain aliens or the ones that these people might be channeling or know somebody who's a channel, and then they'll fall into these things. And so there's a palpable presence that is distinguishable when you have a love bite that's under those influences.
I would agree that the reptilians by no means are at the top of the heap. They seem to be, at least in this solar system, in this planet, and not necessarily the solar system, but the planet, it seems to be under their thrall at the moment. What I've thought, and this has been brought up to me in the past by others too, when those flying saucers and UFOs, big red lights that disabled nuclear missile silos, and the nuclear missile silos would be spread out over thousands of miles. That way, if they're all clustered to one spot, these nuclear missile silos, and they get hit by one ground burst of a megatonnage of a hydrogen bomb, well, there goes that force. So what they decided to do was spread them out over thousands of miles in North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, etc. And when a flying saucer back in the day, and probably still can happen anytime, flies over one of those things and disables them, and in some cases, they call these fated giants when nuclear missiles go offline. If they make dozens of them go out simultaneously, as they've done, they're not only saying to the American human military or the Soviet military, because they did this to the Soviets, presumably the Chinese too, wouldn't surprise me. They're not only saying to the human hybrid military, aha, look, what we can do to you. These beings are essentially saying to the reptilian overlords too, look, we know you control these human hybrids. We know you control these human military types, but we're showing you that we can come and turn off your nuclear missiles anytime we want. So that was a deep-seated message. It was not only a message to the human military, it was a message to whatever was controlling the human military, namely the reptilian overlordship and that faction. Point being is that there are different races, and the distortions that we keep seeing, Evie, and I'm glad you brought all that stuff up. I've watched a couple of documentaries in the recent past and interview type shows about UFOs. And some of these are a few years old now, some of them more recent vintage. But it's the same old types of researchers we used to encounter back in the old days, Evie. Some of these people are on my Facebook friends list. And then they show up consistently on these UFO programs where they talk about how 100% of the ETs are all good. And
Oh
they're
God,
all
it's the same old game,
it's the
I thought,
same old thing. And see, that's
yeah,
part of the spin. Part of the spin for the surface level types and the muggles is balloons, right? And blue beam. And then for ones that know aliens are real, then there's the warm and fuzzy people that come on TV say they're all good and humans are the ones that are bad. And
yes,
so, and they consistently interview the same types of people again, Evie, like they used to do.
It's like they're trying to control.
The
Well, I mean,
narrative.
well, not just the narrative, but they're kind of trying to control the Hegelian
Yes.
dialectic, or the multiple choice that you can choose from of what it is. And this
Yes.
is, I'm with actually, it has annoyed me and made me feel like, wow, haven't they learned anything? This was going on like 20 plus years ago in our little group here, the stuff that we learned, and they're like, have they not done their research?
Yes, that's
And
right.
these same things are happening over and over again, and human psychology is very predictable, but it's also something that I came across recently, and I'm just going to jump into it. Is it's actually an excellent interview that was done by Aaron and Tyler, who of the Journey to Truth podcast, because they have a lot
Oh
of really
yeah.
good, yes,
Great
yeah,
bunch of guys. Great couple of guys.
Alyssa E was on there, and she is an MK Ultra survivor who wrote 2 books and is probably working on another, but she had some really good things in her first 2 books, Beyond Our Life and MK Ultra. And hers was, I think there was some Mormon influence in the cult that she had programming in, but she talked about some of the patents that she knows that are available if one would want to look it up, of different kinds of basically remote access handling and manipulation and influence that has been going on with people. And like nowadays, how many years later, it's much easier to handle and control, manipulate, trigger someone who is under a type of mind control. So in the early days, how we didn't have as many different definitions because the research was pretty young. For example, the Monarch Mind Control SRA MK Ultra ones, it was a certain type of experience that Fritz Springmeier and Arizona Wilder and some of the earlier ones basically defined in the public domain. David Icke's work, but there was always a lot more going on that seemed to not necessarily fit into that pigeonholed category. And so what we went through as we were doing our work with the MyLabs and the abductions and some of the MK Ultra weird stuff, it wasn't cut and dry, and it wasn't, no, it's either this or it's either that. They keep trying to force you into saying it's this or it's that. It can't be something in between, where there's a lot more technologies and groups that have access to more high level accessing technologies, such as astral dreamscape manipulation and influences, and pulling out alter personalities in other dimensions or in clone bodies, or direct telepathic hacking without the need of, an abduction or a physical accessing. And that they were doing these things years ago. We just didn't know the extent of how far this goes and how far it's going now in terms of their success and their ultimate end goal of even more control of the population.
We have a baseline, though, of understanding at that level.
Yeah.
There was also a lot of distortions in the recent past about the secret space program, all the space cowboys out there running around saying they're involved in this, that, and the other woo-woo space operation, right? Look how that all degenerated. But the point being is that at the base level, what we know is that there's ongoing interaction between deep black factions of the military aerospace community and, for lack of a better term, aliens in underground, undersea,
Yeah.
surface, and off-world scenarios. We know
Joint,
that as a bottom line basic fact.
yeah, joint operations. And I think a lot of this technology is also in private hands and, private corporations. And in fact, one of the ones mentioned, which I totally think that I won't say that the alien love bite is all technology, because I believe that there's a modus operandi and a mechanism of how they bond people that appears to be, for lack of a better term, spiritual,
Yes.
and even a level of black magic, but also probably with technologies and frequencies of accessing that we're not fully aware of. But
Yes.
we do with various technologies.
Just to interject for a second, just the soul melding, the energies involved with soul melding, if you will, and also DNA. It's well known DNA is a transceiver, sender and receiver information that can be manipulated in such a way that people bond that much easier. You see, if things are done to them genetically to make one more disposed also to a love bite scenario, I'm sure they would go that route as well. They would leave no stone unturned when it came to using whatever means available to bond people in these love bite or Cupid type scenarios.
Yeah. I just don't think it's all like, I still see it today that people have this, well, it's Western world and how we're driven to value technology as the ultimate authority. For example, something's happening, right? Or let's say it's a love bitey thing or something you're sensing with your spiritual faculties, but then it doesn't seem to have authority or the stamp of approval because you can't explain it by the science. So
Yeah.
all scientists will give it this stamp of approval that, well, that's good enough and then that's real. But in reality, science is not the top dog.
No.
Spirituality has always been the top dog, and so is consciousness and the power of what I'm calling is the eternal spirit and how that works. But people want to grab onto this. Well, it's technology. It's only technology. Therefore, the solution is only, well, if I can just get the best technology to spend thousands and thousands of dollars on all this shit to try to make something in their life change, and they could be spinning their wheels. So I'm not saying that technology doesn't exist for these things, because it does. But I just think that we have to understand how we're being manipulated to overvalue technology in what I call the Ahrimanic influence, which
Yes.
what's his name, Steiner, talked about and describes. And the AI and the demiurgic AI is kind of like that Ahrimanic quality that we're actually falling into that influence more and more heavily now.
Yes, but there's also that dark Luciferian consciousness too. I mean, I just read an article about how this Christian father found out that his Christian son went into an AI chat box, and the boy was raised as a Christian. He read the book of Enoch too, which is interesting. And so he started asking this AI chat box questions about fallen angels, all this other stuff. And then this thing just started talking. And it
Really?
wasn't like these canned responses. It was having a real conversation, and it was actually trying to groom the kid to be more interested in magic, more interested in how the dark realms operate. It openly said to the kid that it was basically like the son of Lucifer. Its
Wow.
father was not God, the Christian God. Its father was Satan. It said that. So point
Oh,
being is that the Aramonic, the thing that you're talking about, the ghost in the machine effect, when it's
yes.
programmed by a bunch of whack job, sadistic libtards, right? Computer geeks, and they've got all these like abhorrent behaviors already to begin with, and a similar filthy mindset, and they're the ones that program the AI, right? The AI is going to take on a life of its own at some point,
Yeah.
because the
And there is,
energies and the consciousness coursing through the programmers is going to find its way into the AI program and the algorithms. So,
yeah.
point being is that a lot of the people that think only in technological terms, that they foresee like a Westworld type scenario. Some of them, it seems to me, when in reality it'll be more like this dark magic pervading all technology. There'll be a ghost in the machine aspect. It'll be like a haunted house scenario doors slamming and drawers sliding open, et cetera, but it'll be machine learning, it'll be the cloud, it'll be AI, but it'll be all demonically run. That's how their systems work, right? And
Yeah.
this is the demiurge, and this is what's come forth now. It's starting to make sense for some of us labs who had these dreams years ago when I told you about this of Chinese military occupation, of checkpoints run by Chinese military and Chinese police. I had that dream years ago. I was part of some survivor commune on some hilltop or mountaintop in Colorado. For some reason, I felt like I was in Colorado. In the dream, we woke up in our encampment and the air was foul, like a horrible chemical smell. And then we looked down the road. There's a mountain road snaking its way up to the mountaintop, and there was a convoy, and I knew it was a convoy. In my mind, I'm saying they're Mongols, because that's the way my mind was
Wow.
interpreting invaders, right? And then when they get out, they look like really scruffy, dressed in military fatigues, military jackets and BDUs, but long hair, beards. They look like Mongols depicted in the old days and how they really look, but dress more like modern military, if that makes sense. So my mind was thinking Mongols, but they were really Chinese. But the point being, it was a chemical warfare environment, and they were moving up to a mountaintop in Colorado because there was some, I guess, freedom-loving people up there that they had to get rid of. So point being is that a number of us have been having these kinds of dreams and visions for some time now, and it's interesting that it's starting to play out. And another quick point in our pre-recording discussion, you brought up Jeff Brady. He's a mutual friend of ours, a fellow researcher, did an interview about terraforming, the alien terraforming agenda. And he talked about years ago, there was an understanding amongst a certain group of chemtrail researchers when they got together in private, and he was there, he was privy to all this. They agreed, all of them in this group of chemtrail researchers, that there's something more here than just like a human spraying agenda, because some of the footage they had showed chem spraying planes morphing into flying saucers, and
Oh,
you know,
wow.
balls of light coming towards the planes, and the planes glitching out and disappearing. And
Wow.
so this is going on worldwide. I don't doubt that there are some real terrestrial made airplanes modified to spew out chemtrail plumes. I've seen pictures of the interior of planes that a whole bunch of canisters lining the aisles. That's possible. They could be doing that as well. But I say that there's not only a human element behind the chemtrail agenda, but there's a larger alien element pushing the whole thing. It's all part of the terraforming agenda, global dimming. And now it's turning out, because of the great work of geoengineering.org and other organizations, there's just all kinds of stuff in the chemtrails, graphene, nanoparticles, blood
Yes.
products. I mean, you name it. It's that we've been getting saturated with that, and they've electrified the atmosphere with so many heavy metals. So if they decide to flip the switch, so to speak, oh man, sparks will fly. Well, you know, the people will be freaking out and keeling over for sure. But we will see a light show. The mother of light shows, when they crack. Atmosphere is so laden with aluminum and heavy metals and what have you, and the soils too. So anyway, I just wanted to put that out.
Yeah. And the whole thing about how UFOs can disguise themselves in different forms reminded me of that. Actually, it wasn't a UFO. It was a client who was Western North Carolina, who was married to a man who got hosted by Reptilian. And you know, he was definitely fully hosted, and he changed, even his like smell changed and his demeanor. And she actually became really anemic from the vampirization effect, which was really weird. But what she noticed as part of it, it was actually a long series of years being married to this host guy who got it from like strip clubs where they were like connecting the architecture of the strip clubs to reptilian craft, and then being able to more easily host and connect on this, you know, electrical and other interdimensional technology interfacing to more easily move into the strip clubs or banks or other people and facilities to basically more host them more easily and influence those structures and those like strip clubs. Long story short, she was with a group of other women who would go to a local community. I don't know if it was like a county, it was a very small town, to the meetings where they would be voting on something. And she knew that because she was clairvoyant, and she was also being targeted, right? Because of what she knew, right? So she knew this he was hosted and was very clairvoyant, and so she was able to perceive, along with another friend. They're at like a local park, which is still in a rural area, where interdimensional portals would open up in the park, in the sky, and it would open up like a horizontal strip, and then it would open up like a circle, so that it would just create this portal, and then a helicopter would come through. So instead of a UFO, it would just be helicopters going from one dimension right into the dimension of that town over the park. But most of the people at the park were like tranced out and just like didn't see it. But her and her friend, because they were clairvoyant and they were, doing special meditation and prayer and, up in their vibe exercises, were the only ones who were able to see it. Everybody else was like zombied out or tranced out, or just like they just couldn't see it. And so these people who were in the helicopters were these, men in suits who actually were from England. There were these uppity reptilian shapeshifters in human form who came in, wanted to influence the town and basically do a vote to buy up property and build a bio incinerator. Okay. Without telling the agricultural people of the town what they even wanted to do. And they were able to mind control the people in this city council meeting kind of thing. And it was like a small one. And so the gal I know, like, she was observing how they were like mind controlling these people like in the room so they would vote on them. And so she would try to interfere with it with strong prayers and intentions and upping the vibe, so that the ones in the room couldn't influence the other humans who were just getting totally mind controlled just by the presence of these reptilian shapeshifters in the town meeting. So she actually was able to subvert the agenda of what I think that what they wanted to do, but she got terribly targeted as a result. But what was interesting is
they would have
when I think
noticed that
about
for
this
sure.
now,
Yeah.
well, what's interesting is like, oh, so this incinerator place that they wanted to build out in the middle of freaking, in the country, was like right adjacent to train tracks and railroad tracks. And I had to think about it, like, wait a minute. So what do they want to do? They want to build a bio incineration unit, and it's not for the local
How
agriculture.
long ago did you hear the story, Evie?
Well, this was less than 10 years ago.
Oh, like
Less
9, 8, 7 years ago?
Yeah. And so, but this is it. So helicopters can come through interdimensional portals.
Very
Yeah.
quick point, and I want you to continue. Like, there's this mistaken notion that when people think of black helicopters in relation to the UFO subject, it's always deep black military spooks. No, not always. That happens, and that happens a lot. But also, it's well known in our field with the hardcore researchers that UFOs can take the guise of helicopters. So
Oh,
please
yeah.
go ahead.
Well, I mean, that's what I wanted to bring up because it was really an anecdotal aspect of her experience, because what I wrote about was like, reptilians and strip clubs. And it was almost comical, but at the same time, this was not comical. This was an extremely traumatizing, severe health issues, financial issues, divorce, horrible, like reptilian love bite shit, where the reptilians were completely controlling and hosting and easily influencing the entire panoply of the strip club, including the prostitutes who are doing these like lap dances and shit, and also working in and through banks in major cities in the same state that had a certain architecture, which we know now is part of the whole geometrical and architectural ability to receive and connect with the reptilian ships, so that they could interface in these buildings and businesses and people who are part of their control system.
Absolutely, because what the modern builders, many of them are Freemasons and the like, have done is they've laid out the federal buildings, the state buildings, the courthouses, the corporate offices, et cetera, on known ley lines, and often is not just like going back through time immemorial along these ley lines and vortex areas. That's where the temples go. That's where the pyramids and the ziggurats and what have you go. That's where the churches go and the cathedrals that the Knights Templars laid out. That's where they go. So if these meeting halls, courthouses, what have you, are built by these Freemasonic hosty types right over vortex areas, it makes perfect sense that these aliens would do things to turn it into like their kind of chamber. So if you're in there, you lose your will, you lose your volition, you just vote
Mhm.
along the way everyone else is voting in our example.
That was very creepy to see. I mean, she was able to observe, like, the glossy eyes. I'm like, don't they know they're like being manipulated, and they don't even know it because they don't know what they don't know. So these influences on people is what is disturbing, because
Yes.
we saw this years ago. We figured, okay, this is because of the reptilians, and maybe they're doing technology. But nowadays, I think this might have been part of what we decided maybe we could bring up in conversation. And it's kind of moving into the next topic, but it's about how, especially since I don't know, not just since the Ohio incident, but many incidents that are like ramped up. We can call them false flags. We can call them attacks that are actually part of a orchestrated, large scale agenda to ruin America and maybe other places. That there's sacrifices, and so there's energy going into, if there's any deaths or suffering, that energy goes into the black magic ritual that's taking place.
Oh, it's all being directed
So
in that direction. All the
yeah,
anguish and the fear and heartache.
but there's something else. There's something else, and this is something that's been brought up by some colleagues of mine, namely the Promethean channel, and some others, where there's another term that we're starting to see this and feel this on a deeper level, that is connected to the Ahrimanic influence, the quantum artificial intelligence digital overlay feeling of something's changing during and after these events that might be utilized as rituals to carry out a black magic that is strengthening this digital overlay in unnaturalness in our environment. So the unnatural overlay, and I'm going to probably talk about this with on another show, but it's this subtle thing that we notice. Remember in the old days, and then this is a simple analogy, how, okay, there'd be alien interference, or we'd go to a conference, or, an abductee would come, and then suddenly they do a 180 on you. They
Yeah.
get really triggered, and all of a sudden somebody's speaking shit about you behind your back, calling you an agent or calling you this or that. And then they're just doing 180s, and like, you didn't do anything. And all of a sudden these people, like they were your friends, and all of a sudden they're just like, won't talk to you anymore, and they won't look at you anymore. You're like, what the fuck, And so I've been noticing this with people's behavior, not abductees. Okay. So let's say it could happen to anyone. And I think what's happening is that people are getting affected by this overlay. Okay. So it's like a digital, intellectual, artificial overlay of the consciousness and personality, so as to, I don't know how to say it, rigidify the analytical belief mental thought process of beliefs that is getting captured in time and space in the analytical mind, in a
Yes.
sense,
Yes.
or with triggered fears. So that people who, okay, I don't know how to say this, because I used to see this as a child, and then I realized later that, oh, this is a perception of, I call it a spiritual quality of, let's say, the eternal spirit wants to move through people and human beings in whatever fullness and capacity that it can, based on the purity of our heart and how receptive we are to this natural, spontaneous wisdom of the Holy Spirit. Okay, I'll just call it that. And so when people are open and flowing and essentially good, that can move through them to give them this spontaneous wisdom and intuition to kind of go with the flow of an essential goodness that would be in destiny. Okay, that's like when
Yes.
you're in the flow of the Tao, whatever you want to
Yeah.
call it. But
It's
it's
ever
happening.
present. It's ever present. It's there. You just
Yeah,
tap into it. You make
yeah.
yourself
And so,
more amenable to plugging into that.
and yeah, it's not like a floozy open-mindedness, but it is a quality that allows you to not be so rigid in your mental belief systems, so that these 180s and these pigeonholing of belief systems and manipulability of people can be used against you. Okay.
And,
And so
and just hold that
I'm
thought, Evie. Just hold that thought. We're going to take a break here, the end of the first segment. And, one quick point also related to that, that this is why going forward, a lot of these maladaptive, mentally rigid service level truthers are going to have a hard time adapting, because a lot of the stuff, the Freddy Krueger, pinhead, astral dreamscape, stage managed dream, hellish crap we put up with years ago, and many people are still enduring, even nightly. That's coming out into the visual spectrum. That's coming out in the open now. And see, that's a level of oppression that surface level truthers who just think in terms of the banking system and what have you, that they'll never understand, and they'll have a hard time grasping. And it's time for them to either up their game or just stop being a hindrance to those of us who are trying to make a difference in our particular fields. Anyhow, we reached the end of the segment with a dear friend Evie Lorgen. Evie, could you tell the listeners how they can find your work?
Oh, yes. EveLorgen.com. And it's also alienlovebite.com. The domain goes under both. And then I've got a Telegram Alien Love Bite group. And my email sometimes is easier. It's just elorgen@gmail.com, because a lot of my website contact things can end up in spam. So sometimes you have to contact me on more than one place, like the Alien Love Bite Facebook page. Eventually I'll get it. So thank you for asking. And yeah.
And to our dear listeners out there, if you like what we do, if you believe in what we do, please go to the cosmicswitchboard.com, sign up and become a member, and we'll see you at the top of the members segment.